Good day. So in the previous tutorial we have learned how to use routes in Laravel. So now we're going to learn about controllers. So the Laravel framework uses the MVC architecture. So let's go in here. MVC means model view controller. So this is a software architecture that is used for web applications. So the aim of this architecture is to separate the business logic from the presentation of the application. So in plain PHP you would usually do something like this. So define all the variables that you need, all the functions, and then below you would just have your HTML code, and then echo out all the variables that you need. So this is not very good because you are mixing presentation from the actual business logic. So the aim of frameworks is to separate those, because in the real world you can have developers and designers working together in a single project. So the developer is usually the one that's handling the business logic, and the designer handles the presentation. So to avoid confusion from the part of the designer and the developer, the presentation should be separate from the logic, so that the designer can easily work with the design and the developer can just work on his logic. So that's the purpose of the model view controller pattern. So the model handles the databases. So it's the one that's talking to the database. The view is the one responsible for the presentation, and the controller acts as the middleman between these two. So usually the controller passes the data that's coming from the model and then hands it to the view. So that's the purpose of using frameworks. So now we can define controllers in Laravel by going to the app http and then controllers directory. So here we have a default controller.php file which we can use. So it's a little bit complex, so let's create another one. So right click on the controllers folder and select new file. So now let's define a controller for the home pages. So in apps usually you have a home pages and the admin pages, which can only be accessed by the users who have login. So home controller is usually responsible for handling requests in the home pages. So example of home pages would be login, forgot password pages, and the like. So now let's check how to create a new controller by going to the Laravel site. So in the documentation site, click here, you go to the basics, so controllers. So scroll down a little bit, and here you can find a basic controller. So we copy this. Oops. So important thing is to remember to always add the namespace before all the code that you will use. So once you have opened the PHP tag, you immediately add the namespace. So the namespace is basically defining where this file can be found. So it's under app http controllers, but instead of using forward slashes, you use backslash. And then this is using the user model, which is in this directory, so it's directly below the app folder. So as you can see, the app folder in here is actually not in uppercase A, but here you have to define it as uppercase. Okay, so now this controller is using the user model, and it uses the base controller as well. So right now we do not need to connect to the database. So this one is actually referring to the user model, so we don't need that right now, so we remove it. And these are the only two that we need. And now we have to change the name of the controller. Since the file name is homecontroller.php, we should define it as home controller, and then it will extend the controller class. So this one is the base controller in Laravel. So all controllers should extend the base controller. So now we remove all the comments as well, and the code. So now we can define functions inside. So let's define an index function, and this will simply return index. Okay, so now we can use this controller in our routes file. So routes can be found in the app http and then routes. So we go here, and now instead of this, we can now remove this and this. So now we can define a new route which will use the home controller. So instead of the function, we say home controller. So this is the name of the class, and then @ and then the method that you want to execute, so index. So now that we have that, let's go here once again. So first it goes to the home controller class, and then it calls the index method. So it should say index when we access the home page of the app. So we go here and then remove that. Okay, so it's now saying index. So it's a good practice to use controllers because it separates logic of the route from the actual logic that you want to perform. So in here we can now do processing of the route. So For example, we have defined a ID. We can return the ID in here as well. So like that. And then in our routes, we can add the ID as usual. Okay, so we can define the ID in here, 25. Okay, so we can define it as optional as well. So you have to add the question mark, and then in our controller you can just add the default value. So for example 5. So if the user didn't specify the ID, it will use the 5 as the default. So let's try that. So it's saying index 5, but if the user instead specifies something 70, it uses that instead. Okay, so I guess that's it for this video. So in this video you have learned how to use controllers